So on behalf of the International Consortium on Chinese, Canadian, and African Sustainable Urbanism, otherwise known as ICASU, it's my pleasure to welcome you to this session. My name is Benjamin Gianni. I'm an associate professor at Carleton University in Ottawa, Canada, where I teach courses in housing and urban design. I'll be your co-moderator for this session, along with Cezar Morar, who's an associate professor at the University of Oradea in Romania. We now move to the second part of the session, namely presentations from our 5 presenters. We'll begin with Professor John Zacharias from Peking University, and the title of his presentation is The Management of COVID-19 in Cities in Socialist and Post-Socialist Countries.
I want to discuss how post-socialist societies have managed the health crisis brought on by COVID-19. After that, I will turn to the socialist societies and say something about their approach. And then finally, based on some empirical evidence, I think I can point to some serious failings on both sides with regard to the management of this crisis. So today's post-socialism appears as an embrace of liberal democracy and neoliberal economic policy. And most of Europe shifted from that soft socialist stance after the Second World War to the neoliberal world of today and the championing of the rights of the individual over the collectivity. A distinguishing difference between socialist countries and liberal democracies is the role of politics. The liberal democracy becomes increasingly depoliticized, and its governance is increasingly taken up with routine, technocratic management. The individual prevails. The state emphasizes the role of the individual, telling citizens to take care of their own affairs and to become resilient. This word resilience is constantly heard today as a new solution to everything, and it's entirely consistent with a neoliberal view of social and economic matters. The state may not be there to help you, so you'd better take care of yourself by becoming resilient. Meantime, in liberal democracies, politics have been transferred to society and giving rise to pressure groups who demand not only a voice, but decision-making power. Carl Schmitt warned us of this more than 90 years ago. The rise of identity politics has suppressed discussions about what is best for society as a whole. In its extreme forms, this individualism gives rise to extremist groups at both ends of the political spectrum. How has the liberal democracy responded to the COVID-19 crisis? Well, the liberal democracy responds by refusing radicalism at both ends of the political spectrum, as we have seen, particularly over this last year. In this health crisis, governments have introduced the état d'exception, or emergency powers, as in the case of Canada, and in 88 other states that introduced similar kinds of exceptional measures in 2020. The liberal democratic state used the legal system to suspend the legal system with regard to specific objectives, and this time with regard to COVID-19. But other emergencies might well arise, encouraging the use of such powers, and indeed we've already seen the use of those measures in the last few weeks. So in an illiberal and authoritarian state, let's call it socialist, like the People's Republic of China, policies are rolled out continuously from the top and can cover virtually all aspects of life. Politics are the purview of government, not society, and politics are really important. The collective good trumps personal good. And so in China, it's held that keeping infection, hospitalization, and death rates low is the top priority. As the education minister said in his October 1st address at the Great Hall of the People in Beijing, where I was in attendance, quote, "We will rule China with an iron fist in the name of the people," unquote. There's no room for discussion of impacts on individuals. The individual is essentially unimportant. Okay, do imposed do impose hardline measures for the purposes of collective security have any relationship with civic responsibility or duty. Arguably, there's less need for individual responsibility when there's a decision-making regime in place that makes the decision for you. I invariably hear in China how many regulations are needed because, quote, Chinese are undisciplined, unquote, as I've heard from many officials over years. But people are also very rarely invited to act according to their conscience or to consciousness of the needs of the whole society. So a vicious cycle of controls is deemed necessary without the cultivation of civic duty. So the widespread reluctance to be vaccinated in China, especially among the elderly, is a direct response to the lack of information and a lack of discussion on public good. The government doesn't trust in the people and appears to believe that social solidarity is not only unachievable, but useless. You just need enlightened management to deal with crises as we are seeing. So if countries shift to a more liberal democratic structure with individualism and group identity prevailing overall, how can we build and maintain social solidarity? We have all been observers of solidarity and a lack of it over these last 2 years in liberal democratic societies. We know a sense of duty is important, but how can it be balanced against personal privilege? If liberal democracies generate divisions along many different lines with all the dangers of a lack of focus when faced with a significant threat like COVID-19, social cohesion and correct collective response can also be observed in many societies. Some countries and regions have not done too badly, at least relatively speaking, during the pandemic. Singapore is an interesting example, as are Taiwan and Japan. Canada had infection rates averaging at about 1/3 those in the United States, with whom Canada shares a long border. Richard Horton, writing in The Lancet recently, noted that about 40% of infection rates across countries is explained by levels of social solidarity, not by specific controls. So the highest infection rates and among the highest death rates were observed in neoliberal, democratic, and somewhat fractious states, at least in their current condition, like the United States, the United Kingdom, Brazil, and some others. So what we learn is that regardless the socialist or post-socialist regime in place, whether championing collective good over individual rights or individual rights above all else, building social cohesion is the strongest suit we have against the virus. Judging by the studies in The Lancet, social solidarity was more important than government-imposed controls of any kind. I can imagine that in the coming years, we will search for ways to balance the greater good, or the good of the whole community, against the rights and prerogatives of individuals. If autocratic decision-making in the socialist state works in the short run to achieve objectives, the human costs are also very high. At the other end of the spectrum, in the liberal democratic system, the place of collective action remains quite unclear. The costs of everyone doing their own thing are very high in illness and death. Building a sense of common cause for collective action and sacrifice does not appear to require a particular political regime, judging by the empirical evidence so far in this pandemic, but does require enlightened leadership and public trust in that leadership. Thank you.
Thank you, John. We now move to our second presenter, Ewa Korczeli-Olejniczak, who's a professor at the Polish Academy of Sciences in Poland. The title of her presentation is Post-COVID, Small versus Large, on the specific resilience of smaller towns in Poland.
Hello, good afternoon. My name is Ewa Korczeli. I represent the Institute of Geography at the Spatial Organization of the Polish Academy of Sciences. And today I will be talking about post-COVID small versus large, that is on the resilience of the smaller towns in the Polish context. I would like to start off with the opinion, or rather surety, that the COVID pandemic of 2020-2022 have left both temporary and permanent marks on the society and economy of cities worldwide, their location, society, space, notwithstanding, and heritage as well. And in that sense, the phenomenon is universal and pertains both to the global cities of the north and small towns in periphery settings. My basic point here is that while no feature of the urban itself, and no urban feature taken separately, be it form or governance intervention, had allowed for immunity of the systems, there is some evidence of the relation between size and urban form on one side and a specific resilience observed in the social and economic dimensions on the other. In my short talk, I will focus on economic resilience and its factors, which I believe are related to the local governance, urban form, and to social practices. Evidence for these remarks derives from research, which I carried out together with my team in the pre and post-pandemic period, that is initially 2019 and currently May 2022, in selected towns of northeastern Poland. Considering their size and geographic location, they are considered, let's say, double periphery or even triple periphery towns. Their size is 5 to 10,000 inhabitants, and they are located in the north, as I said, northeastern part of Poland, which makes them peripheral in European and national scale. Now, when looking at the effects of COVID on economic performance expressed by the sustainability of local businesses in the town's research, we have found that in most cases, the negative consequences were short-term, and the vast majority of firms have survived the pandemic. While the financial programs at the national scale, the so-called anti-crisis shields, pertain to businesses in all regions and localities, we claim that the sustainability factors were rather of local character and related to the successful local governance, but primarily to demographic issues, to urban form, and to the specificity of local social practices. Let me now refer to the factors observed. Those will be three groups of factors. The first group relate to population growth. A relative population growth, not registered but observed, is due to, I would say, two groups of factors. One, temporary returns of students and professionals from larger cities, also from abroad, who were at that time able to study or work remotely from their hometowns. And the second group, a minor permanent migration of big city dwellers and not necessarily ex-residents of the towns, to those towns which were characterized by natural amenities or touristic attractions or both. In some cases, this was followed by an observed increase of private housing investments in these towns. And in those with dense urban development and poor infrastructure, this phenomenon, this latter phenomenon was not observed. So we can say that both urban form and local governance here have played a role. Second group of factors, remote learning and work, I would call them, let's say, typical governmental interventions or activities of the local government. Remote learning and work have imposed some actions on local governments, on NGOs, on residents, the consequences of which can be briefly referred to as digital progress. That is including the extension, improvement of internet connections, educational programs for teachers and students, and so on and so forth. As a result, The small towns have experienced a major digital transformation that will surely strengthen their overall performance and stability. We claim, we can dare to say that in the national scale, a narrowing of the civilization gap between the core and peripheries was possible due to that. Of course, the effectiveness of this narrowing process was related to the engagement of the local government, that is how well the institutions have actually dealt with this situation, with its change, and how well the programs were introduced. And the third group of action factors, bringing up the rear, I would say, whereas service firms in large cities have suffered due to the freezing of touristic activity and to social lockdowns, in smaller towns analyzed a certain unspoken resistance of local societies and institutions towards restrictions introduced was observed. And the latter is rather related to a specific trust and bonding social capital in these local societies, communities. So in brief, and of course this is still a certain assumption to be confirmed by further research, the resilience of small towns analyzed can be attributed to the occurrence and interdependence of certain components of the so-called territorial capital, which after Kamani is defined as a set of localized assets, natural, artificial, organizational, relational, in this case, the effectiveness of local governments and the type of social capital, and to the territorial position as well, which includes, in this case, urban size and urban form. And my final sentence, the concomitance and constellation of these specific components not only strengthens the strength or has strengthened the overall territorial competitiveness of the places, but has also made them more crisis resilient. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Professor Olejniczak. I'll now introduce our third speaker, Gyula Nagy, who's an associate professor at the University of Zagreb in Hungary. The title of his presentation is Challenges Facing the European Green Deal on the Urban Green Transition in the Post-COVID-19 Context.
Hello everyone, I'm Gyula Nagy from the University of Szeged, Hungary, and today I'm going to talk about the challenges of the European Green Deal on urban green transition in the post-COVID context. But first of all, I need to clarify what the European Green Deal is. As we all know that the settings, the circumstances which are around us, environment, the social, cultural and economic positions, circumstances are influencing our lives. But not only these processes are making us face different kind of challenges, but the climate change, the environmental processes like droughts, floods, the increasing mobility, pollution, and the nowadays even more important energy crisis is making us face several challenges. It is challenging our economy, the transport, the energy system, our agriculture, even the state of our buildings are influenced. And of course, they have effect and impact on the different kind of industries. The European Union sees these challenges as opportunities and aims to turn the challenges into opportunities, which must be just and inclusive for everyone. We need to stop climate change. We need to turn to clean energy and circular economy. We need to boost the use of green resources. These are key things, and this is what the European Green Deal is about. And what is the green transition in urban areas? The green transition itself is a period of time when we change our behavior, when we change our activities, the manner, from the unsustainable way to a sustainable way. But we need to do several things to do that. We need to react on climate change. We need to change our energy use behavior. We need to change the transportation modes, the mobility. And of course, we need to green our public and private finances. And this is a key factor because the public finances are very hard to change. And who we need for that is us, people, the citizens. And how can we do that? Of course, with public participation and involvement. The holistic vision of sustainability requires an in-depth analysis of human-human relations, but also human and other than human, maybe nature or environmental relations. We need to understand those processes because the different behaviors, the different lifestyles, expectations about the environmental issues itself can change this whole green transition process. And participation and active involvement in the process can help to make it more advanced. The thing is that during the COVID pandemic, the whole process was a bit accelerated in one sense, but it was burdened in another sense. And the Ukrainian-Russian war nowadays are very highlighting the need for the change. So what can we do? During the COVID and nowadays in the not very post-pandemic situation, the activities which were basically in spatial planning and urban planning were more face-to-face, were shifted to a platform, virtual platform. And this created some kind of evolution of virtual collaboration, which was good because we could share our ideas, we could discuss things, and we could compare our ideas. And this was creating some kind of a virtual debate. Of course, it was non-binding legally, and that is a key issue because the pandemic helped a bit in countries. For example, in Germany, online votings were implemented, or in some cases, mobile applications were created to help people use public administration more easy during the pandemic. And the question is, what is the post-pandemic era is giving us? What is going to happen? We know that we need to increase the involvement of people more and more. We need to value these opinions and counter-opinions more and more. And we need to incorporate more tools which are helping the so-called democratic innovations. We have several tools which can be shifted virtually as well. Participatory budgeting or public debate, why not online? The thing is that the setting which I was talking about is very much influencing this whole process and very much influencing the process of the transition. And urban areas are very good laboratories for that. What we need more technology in co-creation process, but we need to respect human rights. How can we do that? We involve more deprived or marginalized people. We need to respect culture and cultural differences because those are initially changing the behavior of people, and that is going to initially change the whole transition pathway process. And we need an understanding, a common understanding of this whole process. That is one core and one key thing. Therefore, we established a Horizon project, which is aiming to raise the citizens' voices on several levels, regional, local, or national level. And we are trying to implement these kind of democratic innovations. We know what we want to reach. We want to feel that people are empowered and participating in decision-making all over Europe. We know what we want to do to make that commitment to engage more people in co-creation and to create more platform to participatory decision-making. We need to increase democratic innovations. We need to maximize social inclusion and innovation, and we need to scale up because these things are existing on several geographical scales. We need to pay attention more to digital solutions. The thing is that there is a lot to do, but we are very, very happy to do that. The question is ours. When can we do that? Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Professor Naj. We now move to our fourth presenter, namely Alexander Valerievich. The title of his presentation is City Form as a Factor in Relation to Governance and Urban Culture After the COVID-19 Pandemic.
My name is Aleksandar Valjarevic, and I'm currently professor at the University of Belgrade Faculty of Geography, and I am so glad because I am a participant of this interesting and very valuable event. And my topic is the city form as a factor in relation to governance and urban culture after COVID-19 pandemic. And also, I want to show you in the next couple of minutes everything important about my paper, about my work. Before, I want to say something about the city of Belgrade. This is the capital of Serbia, and the city has more than 1,700,000 citizens, with post-communism specific structure and with also communist structure. According to the change of the time and the different political system, the city can be divided on different parts with a different urban culture. The Belgrade has 70 municipalities, but in this research, I was analyzed 7 municipalities. And also I used the GIS, Geographical Information System, and remote sensing methods to calculate spatial problems and to estimate interaction in the space, and for analysis of spatial patterns and elements of nature. And it is possible to find relation in natural and human sciences using advanced methods. Those methods are important not only in GIS and remote sensing, but in urban geography, urban science, and spatial planning, and architectural science, and so on. And you can see on the third slide page, my first figure 1 on the left side, you can see the city of Belgrade with the main health facilities and our urban traffic structure. Before COVID and after COVID, you can see that the central region of the city and the 7 municipalities have the pressure after COVID-19 on infrastructure and of some connection between traffic system and urban parts of the city. In the next slide, you can see, of course, the main results of this research, and we have 4 municipalities that have continuous urban culture, like 5 his mix of urban and rural, and 6 typical rural, and 2 have modern urban culture. The last COVID-19 pandemic in the city of Belgrade produced changes of new phase in urban culture, of course, with the influence of COVID-19 before and after, and now can be divided, maybe different, and analyzed and viewed on this figure map. You can see the main pressure that's always on the central municipalities, and also after COVID, we have that many inhabitants tried to and searching for living in outside municipalities, in rural municipalities, in hope that they can escape the new potential virus spots or new disease. And because of that, in classical communism, urban architecture, we have the totally changing after COVID-19. And also this research, of course, connected between remote sensing and using of open source quantum GIS information system and spatial analysis and auto-adjusted analysis SAGE software gave, of course, satisfactory results in urban studies. In the end, I want to say that this work is only beginning, in hope that my country and government, and especially local government and the new mayor of the city, can use this like new special plane in the future, in hope that we can stop the new influence and better prepare for the same situation. thank you for your attention, and I want to say special thanks once again to all of you, because you attended me to be a part of this very interesting event, and see you in Poland.
Thank you, Professor Valerjevich. We now move to our final presenter, Professor K.M. Nahid Duzman, who is an associate professor at the University of British Columbia here in Canada. The title of his presentation will be Transformational Facets on Planning and Development in Face of the Pandemic, Insights from Laos, Vietnam, and Cambodia.
The Asian nations have been at a constant struggle to manage and cope with a wide diversity of mounting challenges of urbanization. The contemporary planning and development strategies are not well equipped and resilient enough to face the unknown consequences of disruptions such as COVID-19 pandemic. While adoption of quick fix approach to planning and management prevails as an inherent challenge and inertia for most of the Asian nations, COVID-19 puts a sheer pressure on how to reorganize planning thoughts and practices, envisioning the known and unknown threats in the future. While planning beyond the pandemic becomes the key current concern, the time has never been so right to shed lights on the current insights and practices of planning, development, and management for inclusive, adaptive, and resilient planning. Asian nations, notably Laos, Vietnam, Cambodia, being the post-socialist nations, got a critical attention for their immediate and future-looking approach to resilient planning to survive through the pandemic. Hello, everyone. My name is Nahid Duzman. I'm a faculty member at the School of Engineering at UBC of Okanagan, and I am here to shed lights on the lessons that we can learn from these three nations and what they have been experiencing through, and what kind of paradigm shifts that they are envisioning and practicing into their planning ground. So we have seen that these three nations have been gone through a remarkable transformation. So let me go through each of them with the key highlights of their points and have a discussion towards the end. So although challenging, Laos, Vietnam, and Cambodia went through somewhat positive transformation during the pandemic, yet the individual experiences have been responsive to the context of specific problems. So let me start with the country Laos in the beginning. The key points of their transformation are as follows. Since the start of the post-pandemic era, Laos has experienced rapid development with high rates of urbanization and a lack of provision of basic services. In order to accelerate the economic growth, the country has focused on infrastructure, projects, and investments, but at the expense of basic amenities. Urban planning before, during, and after the pandemic remained reactive than proactive. It meant to adjust the zoning and regulatory framework in response to the evolving situation. As you move on to the case of Vietnam, we have the following takeaways we can learn from. Citizen participation and grassroots initiatives have been the remarkable attributes of planning in Vietnam. Essentially, bottom-up planning approach played a significant role in containing the virus across the nation. Obviously, this is a sheer contrast of what we see as a post-socialist country been doing, which was totally contrast to what they had done when the country was under the dogma of socialist nations. For Cambodia, we have seen that Cambodia's economy really has kept alive with tourist-centered policies. The tourist industry has actively engaged in fighting the pandemic through stringent COVID-19 protocols, such as physical distancing, vaccination, crowd management, among others. The central government imposed the policies and protocols, and at the same time, they were wholeheartedly adopted by the citizens and tourists themselves. Such effective partnership is an incredible catalyst for the current and future planning and development endeavors. The question remains now, what can we learn from these three countries which might help to rebuild the planning endeavors into the future? First of all, planning agencies in these three nations need to continue to prioritize and integrate public health and well-being into their future planning and development endeavors under urban resilience and sustainable strategies. Therefore, a clear, transformational, and inclusive mandate for the future planning and endeavors is in dire need, where built environment and health infrastructure need to be integrated in favor of a resilient, adaptive, green, equitable, and affordable development. This further reinstates the need to rebuild or build green infrastructure and promote inclusive governance using bottom-up approach-based partnerships in the forthcoming planning and policy endeavors. Understandably, all investments on financial, economic, health, and social infrastructure and contemporary buzzing approach to planning are fundamentally poor densification and poor urbanizations. However, pandemics such as COVID-19 rather called for a reversal approach to planning, development, and management, as the cities of these nations are in great challenge to become less dense and less urbanized. Innovative approaches such as 10 or 15-minute city would be a bridging ground to achieve a reality where intertwined health and other infrastructure gets happily married with the upheld sense of equity, inclusion, and resilience. Lastly, not the least, pandemic is a historical phenomenon and it repeats by itself after every interval. Laos, Vietnam, and Cambodia should be ready to face such disruption with their current strength of approaches to planning, management, and development. With that, I'm stopping here and I'll be happy to take your questions in the discussion sections. Thank you.